Okay, I am really going to try to have this, presentation be not just for teachers, but for everyone who wants to learn a little bit more about this important historical event. Uh, of course, especially for teachers, we're looking at what's the content, so very basic overview of the history, and what are the methods, what are the best ways to teach about the Armenian Genocide. So today I'm going to do a kind of a quick overview about genocide education, and we're thinking like K-12 at first, even just K to adult, like all of it. How do we think about it, teach about it, and so on. And then we'll get more into thinking about more like grades 6 to 12, the times when you'd be learning about these times in history, and it makes natural sense to be teaching about the Armenian Genocide. The picture on the cover here, just to pause for a minute, is just one young girl who, it's a picture of an Armenian refugee from the Armenian Genocide. And it's important, I think, in studying all of these horrific events of history, large scale murdering of people and oppression and so on, is to remember each and every person. So the humanization of each and every person is really what's going to get us out of that kind of cycle, hellish cycle that leads to something like this. And it's very, very key to learning about it. So that was picked for a reason. All the pictures are always picked for a reason, right? Excuse me. Back when the Armenian Genocide happened, which we'll get into, it's 1915, 1916, there was not a word genocide. That word was coined in 1943. So that friendly looking guy at the bottom is a Polish Jewish lawyer who learned a lot about the Armenian Genocide when it happened, and was obviously very disturbed. And we'll talk about how people knew it was happening as it was going on. And he coined this term as he was writing about the Holocaust a mere, few decades later. So it comes from the word for race or tribe and killing. And his original definition was that it's a coordinated plan of different actions aiming at the destruction of essential foundations of the life of national groups and trying to annihilate the entire group. That's the initial definition of genocide. Later, it got more involved. So we know that, sorry, I'm moving your faces around on my screen so I can read this. This is the part I'm not really an expert at yet. Okay. The Nuremberg trials were right after the Holocaust. They were holding some of the leaders of the Holocaust to account. And during that time, they were calling the Holocaust a genocide, but it wasn't an international crime yet. It wasn't a specific definition yet until the United Nations had a convention on it in 1948. And all this was influenced by Lemkin and his original kind of like simpler definition. They made it a much more detailed definition. So you can kind of, they were just trying to define it more specifically. It doesn't just have to do with killing people. It also has to do with seriously hurting people. It also has to do with creating life conditions that are going to bring about physical destruction, all or in part. There's also quite a lot that goes on with using both sexual violence like rape, but also things trying to prevent births within the group, racial science kind of stuff, removing children from the group, from families. So those are some of the things where if you see that going on, you can start thinking about it in terms of if it's a genocide. Now, what does that mean as far as what the world is going to do about it? That's a whole nother story, but defining it is important. All right, for me, social studies is such a wonderful thing to teach. This is my subject area that I loved to teach back when I was teaching 4th grade and 5th grade, and I love to help prepare the coming teachers to teach social studies. So what is the big point of social studies? I've had a lot of years to think about that, and this is not really from me, it's from a guy named James Banks, who's wonderful, and I'll refer to him later. One of the starters of what they called ethnic studies or multicultural education. And he kind of broke it down saying, what's the point of learning social studies? It's to help our students make reflective decisions, because they are going to be adults in their communities and in our nation and in our world. And anyone who's been a teacher, sometimes you just pause and shudder thinking like, oh my goodness, these are our future leaders, like, whoa. And then other times it's like, wow, the impact I can have as a teacher. Hopefully it's more of the latter. But social studies, so when I get my teacher ed students, most of them say they hated social studies at school. They say it was boring. We just had to memorize facts and dates. It means absolutely nothing. I'm bad at it. And so we have to kind of unlearn all of that stuff. Social studies is about knowledge, right? Facts and stuff like that. But it's also about a lot of other things like life skills, how to work together, how to think, how to consume media. Controversially, it really is about your attitudes and values. It's not about indoctrination, because that we would never want to go there, right? But it is about what kind of attitudes and values are helpful in a school, in a family, in a community, and so on. And really good social studies learning's got to also involve citizen action, getting into doing something to make the world a better place, whether it's writing letters or marching outside with signs or whatever it is, as little as the kids are. Part of learning how to function as a person in a democracy is to get right involved in citizen action. So if you want to learn more, come to my class on social studies methods and you will learn much more. But in the meantime, when talking about something as difficult and horrible as genocide, people start thinking, well, when are we supposed to be talking about these things? You're not talking about real young kids, are you? Well, sort of yes and sort of no. Obviously, there's developmental concerns. You do not start with, what I'm often teaching is about the Holocaust. You don't start with teaching the most horrible, gory pictures of concentration camps to young children. That would be ill-advised, right? And one, it wouldn't get through to them. It could traumatize them, and it's not where it's at, right? So that's really not where it starts. Where it starts is something like in this activity, it was just looking at what's my identity? What groups am I a part of? How do I define myself? And kind of taking it from there. So you can start on the continuum of this stuff very early, but it's not necessarily talking about like defining genocide or even what it is necessarily. So we'll go into a little bit of that, what it's like K to 5, but today mostly focus on middle school, high school, and this specific topic. Okay, but let's talk more generally, K to 12. That's a picture actually from the 1994 very rapid and horrific genocide that went on in Rwanda. And that's an art exhibit, and it's photographs of people who were killed in that genocide. So it's meant to show there's just, as we know, a lot of genocides, and we're not limited to really any one part of history or having it be a thing from the ancient past. It's 1994. So when thinking about the younger kids, the themes are more where we're at. So we're more looking at like literature such as, it comes up later, like the Sneetches is one of them, or the Terrible Things. They might be about animals and friendship and, kind of like hinted at violence, but they're not about genocide. They're not even necessarily about history. Most curricula, they don't really start into the history part till about 4th or 5th grade. Okay, so we're talking more about literature and general discussions about, being a good person and standing up for what's right and stuff like that. So we'll get there. Whenever we are going to study a genocide, like a specific genocide, like the Holocaust or Armenian Genocide or Rwanda, there are a lot of different ways we can go with it. And so it's very important. Step one is to come up with, well, what's your rationale for teaching this, particular subject? What is your rationale? What are you trying to achieve by the end of the unit or lesson? And that should really lead to your learning activities. That should lead to what the students are doing. So if you're in teaching, you know what I'm talking about. It's like we have our objective, we have what we're trying to get to, and then where do we try to get to it? But these rationales are like really big, important rationales. So it's hard to pick one, but you have to pick one to narrow it down. Another big overarching aspect, K-12 and beyond, is the importance of encouraging our students to make connections, connections with their own lives, connections with the text or whatever content you're dealing with, and connections with the world around them. So talking about rationale for teaching about genocide, to me, this one is really central. This was created by the ADL, Anti-Defamation League. If you've been to some of my prior presentations, I know you've seen this before, because this just sums up so much information about genocide studies and, like why we do it. At the bottom of this pyramid here are the kind of things like hate speech, stereotyping, microaggressions, justifying your biases, right? Screen out pods, all these things that we're seeing around us all the time, kind of that's a foundation of this whole pyramid that can lead up to genocidal acts. So the idea here is not that it's just every time, it's a step-by-step process, it's linear, it always goes like this. It's more like once these things are normalized, then the next things are a little bit more normalized too, right? So these are attitudes, these are more acts, right? Bullying acts and hate crimes and stuff like that, that can then lead into more like legal discrimination and laws and segregation and so on, and up the ladder we go. So it's not like you go in linear steps. It's not like this happens every time, and it's not like you can't go back and forth. But this is from studying, all these years of genocides, what people have said. This is really why we have to stop things like this, before we go higher up the pyramid of hate, as they call it. Another way that people have looked at genocide in order to kind of break it down, teach about it, and like understand the rationales behind it, and kind of, without saying, ooh, where are we on this list? Because sometimes you can see your own situation on the list. It's very interesting here, because here, and this is a guy named Gregory Stanton. This is like, I want to say 1988 or something. I don't know. I guess it doesn't really matter. It should be cited here. But he starts like way in the beginning, just the idea of there's us and them. There are groups, and that isn't always a bad thing, right? That would be like saying all cultures and religions and things like that are bad. No, they give us many good things, right? But it's a little different when it's done to you versus when you're deciding it for yourself, right? But it really does start at like a very basic human kind of thing. Then it goes towards, well, for example, it was a Jewish symbol to have a Jewish star, but forcing a Jewish person to wear the yellow stars is very different. Now you're symbolizing them, you're going toward dehumanization. A lot of the propaganda in so many of these genocides, whether Armenian or the Holocaust or Rwanda, or a lot of them, they have to go through this process of dehumanization of the victimized group. It's a lot of propaganda, and it's a lot of equating people with things that aren't people, saying, and we've heard that. We've all heard that recently. Okay. Organizations, right, by the government to enforce these specific policies. When you have the government broadcasting propaganda, if you read more about the Rwanda situation, it's unbelievable the way that happened really, really, really fast through like a fire hose of that kind of stuff, propaganda to turn against people. And then here you have like the actual steps toward genocide. Interestingly, denial is part of the actual genocide and actually starts during the thing itself. So any denial that still goes on after, that's just a continuation really of like a facet of the actual crime. And that really plays a huge role for the Armenian genocide. For Holocaust denial, we've all heard about it. There have been, huge lawsuits about it. It's generally considered to be a fringe kind of thing, but with the Armenian genocide, it's very, very central. The denial, that's coming from certain corners, certain countries, and it's actually considered a stage of the genocide. Okay, so I think one more or two more on K to 12 in general. These are just like general, I don't want to say tips, but like words of wisdom to follow, is that so in a lot of studies of children and teenagers learning about genocide, sometimes the children and the students want to go further than the teachers do. So for example, you want to say Hitler was horribly evil, right? Like we can usually all agree on that, right? But then the students, this is in this one, like a case study where they spent the time in the classroom, the students were like, let's talk about how Hitler was a vegetarian, and let's talk about like why he was this and that, they wanted to really get it complicated. And it is complicated, everything in life is complicated. That's not to say like, oh, maybe Hitler had his perspective that we should listen to. No, it's just if students want to think about something and go in different directions, you got to have that openness to be able to let it go that way. A lot of the teachers in that particular study were like, stop it, he's evil, like end the conversation. And that wasn't very helpful for the students. The other thing is just that writing is our best way to help students develop thinking. And so something as simple as just, this is like a little exit ticket, right? 3 things I learned, 2 things I thought were interesting, 1 question I still have. That's the thing that you can use for every single lesson. But in this kind of lesson, it's important to have some kind of thing like that that's like open and helps them just stop and reflect. Obviously, there's no right or wrong answers to something like that. It is more like, things you could follow up with your students about. Okay, a few more K to 12 general things. In genocide education, a lot of times you hear of things like simulations, they call them. And you've probably heard of a really famous one was the blue eyes, brown eyes experiment, where in the 60s, where they, which is really considered a great thing, but maybe was a little traumatizing to people, which is where the teacher said, if you have blue eyes, you're the second class citizens for the day, basically was picking on them, but didn't say why. And then it's like, now what racism is like, something like that. So many people in the genocide education camp, or group, whatever, say to really avoid simulations, although it's a controversy. So I'm telling you that I fall down on the side of this person, Lucy Davidovich, who really says avoid it because it's trivializing. And what she did was study all of these Holocaust ed curricula being used and found these things that are like have the students stand together really close, and now it's like a cattle car. Now you sort of know what it's like. You really don't know what it's like. You could not know what it's like. There was an example with children studying slavery and having them like lay down, like now you see how close they were on the slave ships. No, you don't. You cannot possibly imagine it from just acting it out, right? So instead, age appropriate, it's much better to read narratives, look at pictures, and understand what really happened, and more so than like have empathy, but not be like, now I know what it's like because I did this little social experiment, because that could be one, trivializing, and even could be like very upsetting and traumatizing to certain students. Okay, and that is really all part of this caring-centered classroom idea, which if you just an amazing educational theorist named Valerie Uka Pang wrote about the caring-centered classroom. And the idea of that is really just what it sounds like. It's got the nice alliteration, which we love for titles, right? But also it's just, that is the most important thing, that the students know that the teacher actually cares about them. They're teaching these things because they care about them and their success, not because of, having to check off boxes and have grades and do well in the state test, things like that. So caring-centered classroom is really the only kind of classroom where you can do this kind of study and not have it be, just memorization and so on, where they're open enough to really learn in that way. So that's what that little picture is supposed to show, right? We're in non-pandemic times, right? Like a little circle with our students, and you see how each of these kids has this personal love for the teacher and the teacher showing it back. I mean, like that's what's really at the center, much more than any curriculum. But one more thing about curriculum is this idea of the null curriculum when it comes to genocide education, which is, the Holocaust is often taught and most other genocides are not often taught. Okay, and it's a variety of reasons, right? It's a wide variety, and the Holocaust was a huge event. It was millions and millions of people. It was very unique. It was a watershed event. And if you only teach about that genocide and no other ones, you're sending a message. So that's what Samuel Totten, who's really an excellent leader in genocide education, Holocaust education, said that, if you want to teach about one genocide, you can't teach about all of them, right? But you do need to teach about the fact that it's an ongoing phenomenon and that it's still with us today. It's important to be inclusive and aware of that. And I tell that to myself too, by the way, as the director of the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies. We do a lot of programming on the Holocaust, and there's a lot of that available. But there's a lot of other learning and exploring and international connections that we're also making, as well as connections to today. Okay, so that's a little on genocide education. I'll pause if anyone would anyone like to question or comment or anything like that now? Please feel free. Okay, or we will continue. Okay, so now let's get into some specifics with the caveat that I am not a historian. And so there are historians here and they can correct me. So please do. So I'm just going to give a general overview, and the maps, pictures, and stuff like that that are here are just about all, I think, all from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in DC, and that there's a list of all these resources at the end of this, and that I'm going to put in the chat now so I don't forget it. Okay, so that way you can also see these links. Here we go. Where did it go? Sorry. Okay, so now you have the list of all the really great resources that went into this, because this is just a very quick overview and you'll want to return to them, I think. Okay, so the Armenian Genocide, to put us in geographical location, this took place within the Ottoman Empire, and this map is kind of showing it at its biggest, and then how over time, it started back in the 1200s, right? But from like the early 1800s on, they were declining. So that's what all these, pictures are. It's like they start losing this part, then they're losing this part. They're losing all this land. A lot of the land is in Armenia, had resources that they wanted, and what I say what is kind of more left of the Ottoman Empire turns out to mostly be Turkey. At the time, it's called the Ottoman Empire. Here's Armenia right here. Let me see if I can use my Zoom skills and circle something. Yay. That is Armenia. And so if you look at the map, you can see that it was being a contested region during that time. And when we say during that time, we're talking about World War I. So that would be, how do I change that one? Sorry. Now that is really a feature that we don't want, right? Okay. Sorry. So this took place during World War I. That's almost like the first fact, I think, that we'll keep in our heads, because a lot of the people who want to deny the severity of this genocide, or even deny that certain aspects took place, right, will just say it's the war. A lot of stuff happens in war. And if that is true, a lot of stuff does happen in war, but also a lot of covering up of these kind of activities. The excuse is that we were at war. Let me. Okay. Please note, okay, I have a note here that I'm just going to read it, which is that please note that the persecution of the Armenians became in the mid-19th century as the Ottoman Empire started to shrink, with most of the Turkish communities outside of Anatolia, modern Turkey, with the Turkish populations moving back to Anatolia. Okay, thank you, Dr. Winogora. I appreciate that. Okay, so to go back in time, the Republic of Armenia, this is an ancestral homeland. This is the original, settlement and culture can be dated back to 860 BCE. In 301 CE, also a very long time ago, they were actually the first nation to adopt Christianity as an official religion. In the subsequent centuries, different empires such as the Byzantine Empire, the Persian Empire, and the Ottoman empires, and then later the Soviet Union, were involved in the Armenian destiny. So we talked a little bit about Ottoman Empire and World War I. The Armenians who were living in the Ottoman Empire were hopeful at that time, were starting political parties to advocate for themselves and for reforms that would allow them to participate more in society. And a lot of times when that happens, there's a backlash, and these are ongoing disputes and issues for a long time that I'm not going to pretend to fully cover here. But there was an ultra-nationalist group of within the military that called themselves the Young Turks, or the Committee of Unity and Progress, CUP, right? And their big thing was called Turkification, that the Turkish culture was the one, that it should be Turkey for the Turks, that it should be no other ethnic or religious groups there. There was propaganda against the Armenians, having to do with World War I, having to do with loyalty, and saying that they were more loyal to Russia and so on. And then what some historians call a dress rehearsal for the Armenian Genocide took place at the very end of the 1800s with the Hamidian, I don't know if I said that right, massacres, which was actually hundreds of thousands of people being killed. So the Armenian Genocide is a lot of times called the first genocide of the modern world, or of the 20th century. And it is considered in that short little period of time, spring 1915 to fall 1916, but really until about 1923. So it's there was a very strong period of deportations and killing, and then it went on for many years. So April 24th, 1915 is a important date, which is often used as like the inaugural date of this genocide, when intellectual and community leaders were rounded up and arrested, and later they were killed. And it's a pattern in these genocidal situations, right? That intellectuals and leaders and anyone who will stand up and fight back and think outside of that box are the first to go. In May, like right away, large-scale deportations began. There are a lot of pictures of this, so I have a few of them here. I did not put horribly violent pictures in here, but they absolutely exist. So these things are absolutely documented. The numbers, as usual, are often disputed by different groups of people, but by genocide historians, they go from anywhere from 600,000 up to 1.5 million. So depending on who you talk to, but really about at least 1 million people, or up to 1.5 million Armenians were killed during that time. People were killed in all different sorts of ways that, again, when we're teaching this to, I mean, even in high school, it's as horrible and shocking as it is, this isn't the focus, but in a way, you know, it has to be suggested, and it has to be faced, right? That all of these things were going on. Thousands and thousands of children were removed from their families, they were being attacked because of Christianity. They were forced to convert to Islam. They were taken away from their homes on these forced marches. People would die along the way on those marches. And then also, because they're out in the middle of the desert where they're sending people, people are also dying from starvation and exposure and disease. So it's all those things. When we talk about the numbers for genocide, it's another reason why people can start nitpicking and saying, oh, well, it wasn't because of that, it was because of this. Well, all those things are considered part of the genocide. There were people, ambassadors and journalists and everything, international people who were responding to this. So people knew about this as it was going on. It was being reported, and many nations kind of like argued about, well, it's national sovereignty. We should leave them alone and let them do whatever to their own people, or should we help? In the United States, they raised tens of millions of dollars, maybe I don't want to say the exact amount, but millions and millions of dollars for relief funds to help refugees after this. So it was a sense of watching helplessly while governments kind of, argued over it, but while a lot of citizens stepped up and helped. This was also the first time you heard this term, crimes against humanity, which would show up later in the Nuremberg trials and in the official definition of crimes that are genocidal. So you can see this is a picture of a forced march of people. It's mostly women and children being forced to take what they can and leave their homes and leave their nation. This is just more documentation of what was going on. You can see the soldiers with guns, and they are getting everyone out of the town to take them to an execution site and kill them. And this is another, it's a little blurry, but you can see like the children in the foreground and soldiers guarding them. And again, mass deportations. These are some scenes from refugee camps that were at the time, because people had to leave with nothing. And so this is how they were living. And there are, I just selected very few. In the resource list, there's a whole photo exhibit of this from the Holocaust Memorial Museum. There's just a lot of documentation of this, and which I don't know, a lot of people I think don't expect, because 1915, 1916, that sounds like ancient history, but people knew about it. It was being reported. It was being shown. And these are actually two posters from the United States, from committees trying to raise money. And this is like while it's going on, right? To send, to like sponsor children who are being hurt and killed over there. So if you teach American history, this could be a really great, connection in, and also to compare it to reactions to the Holocaust a few decades later. Okay, so more issues specific to the Armenian genocide, denial. This is still going on today. So many scholars of the Armenian genocide are actually, still concerned with finding documentation and proving the authenticity of that documentation, because the Turkish government for like this whole time has really been engaged in a lot of denial. At this point, it's not denial that something happened. They have an admittance that something happened. They admit that hundreds of thousands of people were killed, but what they will not admit or agree to, like many other countries and like all genocide scholars agree to, that it was systematic. In other words, it was planned by the government in order to eliminate a group of people. It was premeditated, right? It was planned. It didn't just happen because a bunch of hate exploded. There were orders, right? And the denial is also in the numbers and in saying, well, there couldn't have been that many people and so on. So anyone who has studied the Holocaust knows that this is, part of what Holocaust historians deal with too. But with the Armenian genocide, there is a big difference. Whereas if you visit Berlin today, not that there's not neo-Nazis and things like that still, but there's a lot of recognition, a lot of museums and learning and exchange that goes on about the Holocaust. There's an admission, there are memorials. In the case of Turkey, they actively fight the understanding of this as a genocide. So just recently, this is a headline down here from 2019, and it was only in 2019 that the Congress, American Congress, did a bill recognizing that it's an Armenian genocide. So other presidents, I won't even bring Trump into it that much. I mean, he went against this because of how he felt about the Turkish dictator leader, felt positively towards him. But really, other presidents too were saying this is going to harm our relationship with Turkey. We need to have a good relationship with Turkey. They're an ally in an important place. So this is the first time that there has been that official recognition. And our senator, actually, Senator Menendez, was really key. He brought this up. He's the one who pushed for this. And it was a very, if you look up the scene of when this was passed, there were people crying, and there were Congress people of Armenian descent who were saying, just thank goodness for this, and describing their family stories. And so it's still a very active, I don't even want to say debate, but it's like a campaign, with a campaign of continued propaganda, I would say. And so if you do a Google search, this is where media literacy becomes really important in teaching, right? Because you can do a Google search and find all kinds of different things questioning, well, this is the Armenian claim and stuff like that. And if you look at it, they're generally from Turkey, so you want to find actual genocide studies sites that are reliable and accurate, and we can never be fully objective, but based on evidence. And so that is another reason why you have a nice resource list to refer to, because there is quite, there's all the evidence that a thinking and objective person needs to see this. Okay, was there accountability? There was some accountability. The three main leaders of this genocide fled, and then they were sentenced to death in absentia. But many historians say that it was maybe more of like a show trial, or that just some people were held accountable so that they could move on and appease people who wanted that to happen. So for the Armenian genocide, as well as any genocide, super important to know that denial it's like always going to go along with it. It's trying to deny the humanity of that group still. It's incredibly offensive and hurtful, and it has a point. It's to rewrite history, or to write it so you're not the villain of it. So recognition of the Armenian genocide is very important, and commemoration. And this is why every year, there are these events, whether it's learning events or commemoration, or hearing testimony of people and their families. And this is also why education is so important, because we want our students to think for themselves. We don't want it to be like, well, Dr. Dobrick said it happened, and this other site said it didn't, so I don't know. We want them to be able to have the media literacy, read the stuff, and think for themselves. I'm looking back at the chat again. Okay, that's a very good question, which let's wait on that so I can finish, but please ask that after, because very good question. And when you see these patterns happen a lot, but differently in each occasion, right? Okay. All right, so back to the educational side after that very quick whirlwind history lesson. Whenever we're learning about genocides, whether it's the Holocaust or Armenian genocide, first think literature, whether, especially for the younger kids, right? But for older kids as well. So this quote, this was in my dissertation, and I just really loved it, which obviously historical knowledge is essential, but literature teaches us in part how to feel about the historical facts, right? Literature and also, you know, films, which there are a few, they really help us to build empathy and to understand what it was like to go through these things in a much more complex way than, you know, like a simulation, like a game kind of thing, right? And in a different way from just reading the facts. So for the younger kids, that's where we're laying the groundwork, right? A focus on literature that has these general themes of accepting yourself, accepting others, and standing up for justice. So these are just, this is like a tiny collection and a whole nother workshop in itself, right? But for example, this book called Terrible Things, it was written about the Holocaust. It's a read aloud book, and it's really just about animals that are disappearing from a forest. That's an allegory. And so it has nothing to do with killing people, but it's saying these terrible things are happening, and like the bunnies are disappearing, and but then the other animals don't care, and then they come to the next animals. And so it's a way to discuss these themes without making it into human history. And a lot of times, like things like the Sneetches or things like the ugly duckling, they make it very easy because we're just talking about animals or fantasy figures, but we're talking about, you know, deadly serious themes. Even stories like this, like stories about America as a nation of immigrants and how what we all bring, these are the kind of storybooks we should be reading to our kids from the time they're 3, right? And that is part of that whole continuum of genocide education. I tell my teachers in training, if you just do a read aloud like this every day, because we're encouraged to read books aloud to our students, right? Then you're really doing a great thing for those students' future. So this is just a question of, you know, selecting these kind of books that deal with how do we get along with people who might look different from ourselves. Why is that an important thing in this country, to actually get to know people of different cultures and backgrounds and perspectives and so on? So you can have great conversations with young kids around these things. And the idea is hopefully, you know, the spiral curriculum, as you go through the curriculum, you're learning more and more about these themes. So now let's talk about 6 to 12, meaning grade 6 to 12, because that's when you can start really getting into more of the historical details. But you shouldn't forget that literature can still be at the center of the curriculum, whether that's in a history class or an English class. And so these are a few suggested titles that are memoirs. They're either memoirs of people who lived through the Armenian Genocide or their family members did. There are book lists in the resource guide. These are just 3 incredible ones. And actually, Peter Balakian, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, is speaking, I want to say next week, with one of the centers around here. And I sent it out in the email earlier. But he's a fabulous speaker and Pulitzer Prize winning author. And these are a couple other ones that are memoirs. So there's a lot of those to choose from. Ways you could approach those in classes is either reading it traditionally as a whole class, or each group doing a book like a book club and then coming together. There are a lot of things we can do with that. Point being, literature centered to humanize and to enter the events without, you know, pretending to and simulating it. Okay. Historical fiction, this is another thing we could talk about for a long time. We, to go back to the Holocaust, did a showing of The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. That it was a historical fiction about the Holocaust. And I mean, there was there were a lot of strong emotions about whether it was a good or bad thing to make up, fictional stories within something as contested and serious as a genocide, right? But this is how people process their experiences. So again, here are three recommendations that are, I think this Sandcastle Girls one might be the most frequently one found in schools, but this one, like Water on Stone, which is a verse novel about the Armenian Genocide, is an incredible choice. In this one, it's about a girl and the stories her grandmother tells, and so it like takes place in present times and kind of goes back and forth in time. So again, this could be a great fit for an English class, but also for a history class. Centrality of literature. Okay, wow, time is flying. Okay, so there's a wealth of resources for this stuff online. And so what I always do in these workshops is like introduce a little of it, but then send everyone home with more so that you can learn more. The ones that I thought had the best lessons to go with were from Facing History and Ourselves, which was originally a Holocaust education site, but now does like every genocide, but also just teaching techniques in general that can go with almost any topic in history. So they have a unit of 8 lessons, all on the Armenian Genocide. It's supposed to take, I want to say, like 10 days of class study or something, but you could pick 1 or 2. So we're going to look at that one. We're going to look at one from the USC Shoah Foundation. That was the one that Steven Spielberg founded, which was, they were originally trying to film as many Holocaust survivors telling their story as possible, but it has expanded to many other genocides. So they actually have a site full of testimony from all over the world from different events, which is quite amazing. And I also thought that the photo exhibit, because like they say, pictures worth 1,000 words, but photos are so great to reflect on. That was another one I picked as really exemplary. So let me see if I'll be able to just show it very easily, or if I mess things up. Okay, let's go back here. All right, this is the Facing History site, which is absolutely incredible. So in that resource list, it shows you this one place they have just all these teaching techniques that could go with anything. And that is just such a great site for my students, and they love it. But this in particular, number one, it links you to an entire book here. It has a whole, let's see if I can, here, it's a 200-page book of history, interviews, art. It's amazing. So it's like, here's your book that you can use for this. They also have a film, which they link to. This is kind of the beginning, just the background. But then as you can see, it starts with something like, what is your identity? Us and them. How do you consider, what groups are you a part of? What groups are you not a part of? And so on. And it uses art to teach about that. And then it kind of just, it has a lot of things like analyzing historical evidence, important themes in learning history that are applied to this particular event. And they're truly excellent. I know that my time's running out and I want to hear questions and stuff, but so this will be second to last thing. So the USC Shoah Foundation, they have this teaching with testimony. And what's amazing about this was actually a very simple activity where it's us and them, and they're talking about identity and subgroups and stuff like that. But what's amazing with this is that it has these clips of testimony, either from people who went through the Armenian Genocide or who studied it or whose family went through it. And it's like matched up with what you're studying. So if I try to play films, it gets messed up, but it has these tiny little clips. And for students of today, this is a very, much more effective than just reading it. And so you can really, really do a lot with that. And, if you're looking at this or the Holocaust or Rwanda, this USC Shoah Foundation has expounded so much and has this kind of stuff where they have the direct evidence, you know, straight from the horse's mouth, as they say, with what you're teaching, which is pretty amazing. And the final one I'll show you is just, again, this photo essay from the museum in DC, because it has really, really high quality photos, like when you really look at it closely, you know, and you can do a lot with that for visual learners. Okay. And I think, yeah, that's it. This is the same list that I just put into the chat, right, in that file. It's all linked to a lot of amazing stuff. At the bottom is a list of books, like those books that I showed you, which kind of seem the best to me. There are tons more to explore. The Bergen County Center, which is like another center, has done a lot of amazing things on Armenian genocide, and they have local speakers and programs filmed on their site, as well as ones that are upcoming that are really good. So that's a good local one to keep an eye on, as well as our own. And thank you very much for your attention. I always end with, you know, something from someone eloquent and wonderful like Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel, who said, "We must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented." Right? We cannot stay silent. So thank you for coming, because that's us doing, you know, our one drop in the bucket for the day. It's amazing to do that, and to do that with you. Thank you. I'm checking the, yes, I can, thank you. I will also share the PowerPoint, because now you can have both, and you have the file up there. I'll stick that in there too, because sometimes people just want to have that. Okay. And if you have any questions or comments, please do ask. Leonard, would you want to ask your question, or do you want me to? I could just read it since it's in the chat. Go ahead.
Yes, of course. You know, the concept of denial.
Pam.
Sorry? Thought someone else, so I'm sorry. I mean, we deal with the concept of denial, and Turkey's extraordinary, almost 100 years of history of pretending it didn't happen. But I've been exploring it, and I'm wondering if, comparing it to the denial, the Japanese continue to state that their rape of Nanjing, their destruction of Manchuria, even renaming the country, their takeover of Korea, their quote unquote comfort women. And in spite of all the protests and all the things, they've made only oblique references. It's absolutely not covered. I was in Japan. One of the things I noticed is there's zero reference to Japanese aggression, which began by realistically in the 1920s and certainly on China 30s. You would think it never happened. I mean, it's almost like Imperial Japan. I'm just wondering if we could draw that as a parallel to Turkey, this sort of, oh, well, that was another government in another time, and therefore it doesn't count.
I think it's absolutely analogous. I mean, and I remember there was a whole thing where they were going to maybe adopt textbooks that talked about it slightly differently, and then that didn't even happen. So, I mean, the real question to ask is like, what is the power in doing that, even when the whole rest of the world sees it as one way? You know, it's kind of like, to me, it's like the whole doubling and tripling down on something, because you can't admit how wrong you really are, but also there's probably practical things right now, right? There's probably, it's not just like, okay, we did it and let's move on. It's like, there are a lot of things that come out of that could still be contested.
Well, we also know that America has to look at its international interests. Turkey is a NATO ally, not much of one lately, and hardly moving towards democracy. But Japan also has the same card to play. It's like, well, we're really vital. You're in Okinawa, we're here, and we don't find it helpful that you keep pressing us on something we've chosen to forget. And the American government does not pressure them. No president, starting with Truman. I mean, look here. I mean, Woodrow Wilson knew about it. Morgenthau was the American ambassador, and at that time, the Army. He wrote him detailed letters of what was going on.
Yeah.
Wilson chose not to even address it at the Versailles Conference. So American interests do not always coincide with human rights.
That's for sure, whether domestic or international. So that's a complicated thinking kind of thing, you know. It's like we can never be teaching our kids anything different, like anything so clear cut, you know, or that if we could go back, we would have done XYZ. It's like a little more complex than that. To me, the inspiring part of it is that citizens did something anyway, even in this kind of case, even when governments didn't. But I agree, it's in Japan, I've visited there too as a teacher program, and it's like you can't mention some of those things. In fact, then they tell you not to mention these things. So, Carrie, I see your emoji hands.
I just want to add that this denial had something to do with it's a never-ending history, because at one point the government in Japan, like a more democratic government, kind of apologizes about comfort women, but now it's the current government is more extreme, and then nationalistic, and then they brings it back. It's never happened. It's more like a scenario of victims have to prove that happened. But you know that, any case, victims do not have access to those resources, and then they never expose that, those documents, and they have it, but they never expose that. So it's on the victims. Even one of the comfort women are still alive, and she testimonies, but they don't still denies. So I think it's the same pattern across countries. It's sad because the history repeats. I don't want to say we are in the middle of history repeating the tragedy. But I just want to ask about this. I was exposed to Armenian genocide through a children's book. It's a beautiful children's book. One of the things you recommend, and I just the other things I read and I fell in love. But that's what I expect our children will get exposed to those kinds of stories through the literature, because in the reading books, we can sense the victims as a human, not a victim of just documents, but you can sense how they went through and what are the things their mind going on in that moment. But I just don't want to take it as a religious conflict. So is there anything else? I don't think so. It's only the religion is the reason.
What do you mean, for like genocides in general?
No. In our Armenian case, because it's in Islam and then Christian.
Yeah, but it wasn't. It was more ethnicity, like broader.
Right. Yes.
Yeah,
okay.
So I don't think that you need to like focus on that much at all, really. I mean, it's a very interesting question, and it's like there's a ton of stuff written about on the Holocaust, that because there's Christian, you know, I don't like history of anti-Semitism and stuff. So some people just didn't want to teach that at all, you know, because that's embarrassing or upsetting or whatever. So there's enough, in my opinion, there's enough to teach about these things, that if there's parts of it that seem uncomfortable or that aren't, you know, that's not the part you're going to focus on.
Right.
And I just want to also say that it is super important if you're, it's not all Jews are like that. It's not all Muslims. It's not all Turks. It's not all Armenian, that's very important for
Yes.
us to explicitly say also in any one of these cases.
Yep, and then even among Turks, there are some people resistant to the genocide. That is a part of the real story that happens. Even there's some Japanese people, they are against to comfort women, denial of comfort women. Yes.
Yeah. So whenever we make like a big broad statement, it's worth it to like unpack it, and be like, well, that's not the way life works.
I know. I hope this is a good time for K-12 education to teach those things, so that children can see some connections, what's going on current world. They can make a good connections.
I hope so too. I mean, there's so much that we have to do. And, if it were up to me, we'd be throwing the standardized tests in the trash and be studying how to make it a more socially just world, which one bit at a time, right?
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you everyone so much for coming. I really, really appreciate you taking the time at this incredibly busy time of the semester. Please keep in touch and have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too.
Okay, thank you.
Allison, it's Lisa.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, so good to see you.
Yeah, sorry, I'm having like bad hair day. My sister's actually with me on the call. I don't know if she's, that's why you see her name twice.
Oh, that's
I
great.
shared with her, I said, you know more about this because I told you my niece goes to Armenian Sisters Academy. So, she learns a lot about everything. And I thought it would be great for her to participate. And then when we do finally get a chance to speak, that I'd love for her to get involved. And, she goes